The creation of a model railway involves a multitude of varied technical and creative abilities, but it also brings a personal satisfaction for the modellers themselves. This creative flair depicts the personality of the modeller and also allows one to fantasise or reproduce the real thing in miniature form. In this program, we take you to visit some of the many unique and beautifully constructed layouts throughout New Zealand. I'm Merv Smith, and I'm sort of going to guide you around the model railways we've created. Look, let's get this one out of the way first. It's the Piky Tramways and Collieries Company, an entirely fictitious 2-foot 6-inch gauge railway set, sort of, on the west coast of the South Island. The Piky uses HO scale, but N or 9mm gauge track, so it's HON 2.5, HON 9 or HOE, the European designation for the scale gauge ratio. I just built it all out of cardboard or plastic cards, but used either N-scale chassis or bogies. It's a mythical coal carrier from mines high in the hinterland to a huge power station on the coast. But golly, as you'll see, we also manage passenger trains, some of them looking remarkably Austrian, and freights and even container services. We can run up to 4 trains at once on the Piky, but usually stick at a maximum of 3. Now, I'm not an exhibition class modeller, but the overall effect of trains, buildings and scenery, all made by the same hand and to a similar standard, perhaps gives a homogeneity to the layout. And above all, I like to see fat little trains on narrow tracks in great big New Zealand scenery. I guess the Piky, which is in its 4th and largest recreation, is my painting or sculpturing or patchwork quilting or whatever. It gives me peace from the daily terrors of broadcasting, and best of all, if something's going wrong, I can just turn the little blighters off, close the door to the train room, and walk away. It's part of me now, and part of what makes model railways, in all their forms and fancies, such a mighty hobby. Now we look at Norm Gaby's railway in Hamilton. Norm's layout is based on NZR 3/16 to the inch scale. It also includes a model railway club. Norm has a fantastic ability to create models and scenes that almost talk to you. Norm, on the other hand, is a man of few words.
I like modelling. I'm always modelled. That makes it about 30, 40, 50 years. The layout is all in sections, modules, so they can be taken away if we ever shift. And I started off by building little dioramas, and they eventually went into the layout and formed the basis of it all. I like building structures, mostly. The older they are, the better. I'm fascinated by old buildings. As far as running the layout is concerned, I very rarely do. So I like building the structures. The hardest one I've built is the model of the Craven crane. And I'm fascinated with cranes, always have been. And that one was a good challenge, so I had to go.
Here we are with the Otago Model Engineering Society in Dunedin, and their model scenery is designed to allow model railways throughout the world to be run, and at this point we're seeing American railways. This society has a membership of approximately 150 who work at the high degree of realism in construction of models and backdrops. Nearly all the trains that are run on the Society's layout are using scale speeds at all times, ensures running reality at its best. The Society opens its doors to the public approximately 3 times a year, 2 of these being the Dunedin Festival and the Little Train Show. And of course, special group tours can also be arranged. Whilst in Dunedin, another layout of unusual type is John Ripheart's. John's railway started as a model of the NZR prototype in the area, the original Dunedin and Port Chalmers Railway. From there, it grew and grew to be the fine layout you see with trains from all eras. Construction started on this TTN 3.5 scale railway 7 years ago. John's nimble fingers built everything from the ground up, with the exception of the locomotive mechanisms. John spends usually 1 to 1.5 hours a day on the layout, and he says scenery is his forte. Now we shift north to Auckland to view a wonderful 9mm scale layout which was constructed by Paul Burnson, although not in his possession now. Paul points out why he preferred to model in 9mm.
Really, probably the biggest attraction of 9mm is that each model, no matter how insignificant, is a model in itself, as well as the attractions of building a layout. So things like road vehicles or even a bicycle is a detailed thing in itself because it's of sufficient size. At the time that I decided to go into it, it seemed like a logical thing to do, and there was very quickly a group of people who were interested in it, which got it going as a viable scale to work in. Primarily because of Bob McCulley, who had worked in 9mm through the 50s and 60s. And had established the idea of a large-scale, fine-scale concept. I suppose basically I'd got sick of it. It was I had it for 12 years, and I've worked for just on 22 years full-time as a model maker, and this is why progress on the layout is very slow at times, because I either get busy at work or else by the time I've done a day's work model making, I don't feel like sitting down and doing more in the evening. So it does tend to slow things down a bit. You know, people who've got busy executive jobs go home and make models to relax from that. Going and making more models after a day of model making isn't really very relaxing.
To take a break from layouts, Graham Selman, who is internationally known for the manufacture of model railway wheels, explains his business operation.
North Yard is basically a supplier of components and parts to the model railroading industry. It all began back in 1978, mainly with some wheels through involvement with another local manufacturer, and wheels quickly became my bread and butter line. It since developed into other things, including modelling materials and fastenings, and eventually a locomotive kit, which took many years to produce. And now I also get involved in special project work with people for locomotive mechanisms and special parts and things like that. The wheel side of the business developed through another manufacturer who was producing kits and producing his own wheels, having some difficulties with wheels. And I was in the engineering industry at the time and interested in trains, and he came along and saw me, and together we managed to sort out his problem. I hadn't really had any thoughts of manufacturing at the time, but it did implant in my mind the thought that if we could overcome the problem this way, then there were a lot of other things that could be done. Being a toolmaker by trade, I spent some time playing around and making a few dies, and soon discovered that I was able to produce some plastic wheel centres, both driving wheels and then wagon wheels. And also in those dim dark ages, things were pretty scarce from overseas in New Zealand. The local hobby shop, I well remember having a tray of wheels hidden under the counter, which he pulled out and very, very sort of cautiously let me look at, but I wasn't allowed to look too long in case I wanted to buy the lot. So obviously there was a demand there, and I began from there. So with a bit of tool making experience, I made some plastic dies, dies for moulding plastic. We made some wheel centres and machined up other parts, and the sort of thing that produces is a wheel set like that. Now this is my assembly press here. I don't do all the wheel assembly myself these days. I did in the early days in one small corner of a flat that I was living in. That's where it all began, but these days the number of wheels is just too great for that, so I get most of them assembled on contract. But I still do a few specials like this one I'm doing here. With wheels, there's all sorts. Variety is the name of the game in model railroading. People want different diameters, different centres, different axle lengths, different colours, you name it. So the small quantities and the specials, like this particular one I'm doing, I assemble here myself. So I've got wheels which I've already assembled. I've pressed the centre into the tyre, and now what I'm doing is pressing the wheels onto the axle. And the novelty soon wears off after you've done a few thousand of them. So fortunately for this order, I'm only doing a few. But that's basically how it goes. We press the wheels onto them. Everything's held together with a press fit. No glue. This is the quickest way, it's the neatest way, it's the cleanest way. Goes onto a back-to-back gauge, which ensures that the gauge is correct. From time to time we give that a double check with the old NMRA gauge, and that looks fine. They've got to go through another check yet, which is the final spin check. They get spun between my fingers, and if they're reject, sometimes I can straighten them with a pair of pliers, but basically that's how the process goes.
For further information, it's North Yard, P.O. Box 27 368, Mount Roskill, Auckland, New Zealand. Originally built at Featherstone and now transferred to the Waikato, Bill Richmond's layout, which is LMS, is on the grand scale. This model railway is simply magnificent, and Bill explains his interest in the LMS.
Well, it's the fact that since from a child I've always been an admirer of the LMS. It started when my mother bought me a tin plate Hornby Naught gauge George V, or something like a George V, and I became an LMS fan long before I knew what LMS meant. And I went on in that way for about 15 years. Unfortunately, everything I had was stolen. But I've always had a tremendous interest in the LMS, and the real joy I get out of it is trying to recreate accurately as I can the whole setup of the LMS, particularly the main line from Euston northwards to Rugby. I'm not all that happy with what I've done, but I suppose that's inevitable because you're trying to model things that are quite impossible to do accurately, particularly from main line point of view, because you can't expect to get distance in a model contained in a shed 40 metres by 30. So what I decided to do was to make the layout of various aspects. I tried to model the Euston and Camden area eventually fairly fully up to Primrose Hill Tunnel, that's 1.5 miles. And then I leave out 17 miles, including all the area around Willesden, Wembley, Harrow and Watford, and start off at Watford Tunnel's north end, and then include the Bourne End area and where the canal goes under the river at that point. And from then it reaches Tring. Tring is the most fully developed area. I've tried to model the cutting, and eventually the station will be fully developed. I've always kept to the figure of 2/3. I've tried to have 2/3 the number of tracks. My trains are 2/3 their prototypical length, at least, and the whole siding area and platform areas have been worked out on the basis of 2/3 of what the prototype is. From there, I just modelled road, which is the point at which the quadruple main line leading from Euston towards Rugby breaks into 2 sections of 2. One section going to Northampton, the other section going through Weedon, Welton and Kilsby Tunnel and into Rugby that way. Now that's the main line and is used far more than the Northampton line. But I've also modelled that piece as far as Kilsby Tunnel South End, and that's really what I've been trying to do. I get the greatest joy because when I get the general aspect of the feel that my trains look like the LMS trains looked at that time. I use the word sit, if you can understand what the word sit means. It means the way in which the engines and wagons sit on the line. It's absolutely vital therefore to have correct size wheels, the footplate the correct size, level, and the general aspect. It looks that's sitting on the line the way that prototype locomotive did. And that's the thing I get the greatest joy out of.
Tramways are close to my heart, and this, the Piky tramway, is really intriguing. Peter Sewell explains why he modelled the Piky tram.
Well, the Piky tramway is one that's very well known, I guess, around Auckland. But the main reason was I had no layout and anything to run any locomotives or nothing on, so except for a piece of track that used to sit on my tabletop. And then I thought, well, if I'm going to build a layout, it's got to be something that's going to look pretty good. And I thought of what my skills are. My skills at making scenery and vegetation are pretty limited. So I thought, well, it's got to be something that's got plenty of rock faces and vertical scenery. Because that sort of leads into the other thing. I don't like to be able to see through something. I like to be it as a complete scene, so you can't see right through it and see how the people are standing in the background. I like to be able to look into it and see something it's like a picture. The whole thing's there. So to make it transportable, it has to be obviously pretty narrow width. So the only way to get around that's to use lots of vertical scenery. And I thought, well, the Piky tramway's got lots of vertical scenery. It's all cliffs. So that means you can have a really narrow benchwork and lots of vertical stuff, and it can be right close to the edge, because that's where it was. It was right close to the very edge of the cliff, and there's nothing out in the front, so you can get something that looks really realistic. I would say about half the models that are there are typical to that area, yeah. If not like the vertical boarded locomotive that was used at Heuer, which is only a little way around the coast there, and the Price locomotive that was used at Heuer as well. One of those was used at Heuer, although it's slightly different form to what's there. The Sandfly, of course, was used right out there.
HON 3. HO is the scale, and N3 stands for narrow gauge, representing 3 foot in actual size. Bob Gick talks about his involvement in model railroads.
My father was actually a shunter in Frankton Junction when I grew up. probably instilled into me a certain amount of compassion for steam locomotives, because the diesels leave me cold. But I felt that I was into slot cars, and when my son started beating me at slot cars, I decided I'd take up something more leisurely, which was model railways again. And of course, with the amount of space that I've got initially, was this layout here. It's only 12 foot by 13 foot wide. So I thought, well, I'll go narrow gauge rather than NZR because I can fit a little bit more into it. Also, the components and everything like that are all HO scale, so I can utilise those. And to me, I thought my philosophy is that if I learn something, I'll pass it on to others. Whereas if you get into a different sphere, such as slot cars, it's very competitive. You keep a certain amount to yourself. Whereas with railways, I'll share whatever I do. And my philosophy was that if I did something good, I can pass it on, and there's always something better around the corner if you can only find it. So I've been passing on hints like this to other people, which has actually upgraded their layouts too, especially if you're into Midwestern American type scenery.
New Zealand railways are a popular choice for many, including Neville Con, whose layout is based on the Henderson to Waitakere line.
Henderson to Waitakere was turntable to turntable, and I was going to do point to point. That's what it started off at. But then, with a lot of peer pressure, I was told that running the layout round and round was preferred. And after I actually built the layout, yes, I agree with them. That's why it was basically picked Henderson to Waitakere. Building layouts is my main love. So, you know, this will get to a stage, in some parts we pull down and redone again, because I just like going on and on, building and building. And scenery, yeah, I like scenery, as you can see. Mainly because it's local area, I can just go up to the area and look at, you know, take photos of the area and old photos, and try and work to, you know, within reason of it. It's pretty hard to do in models size because your room's cut down dramatically. But yeah, but I try to keep to that, but it's pretty hard. I've never seen a layout that had done any of the suburban line, and I quite like the bush, so I got as far out of the suburban line as I could get, which was Waitakere for me anyhow.
Fathers, mothers and hobbyists, both young and old, are fascinated by LGB's faithful reproduction of original American and European prototype trains. Plus, they're inspired by the fact that LGB layouts can be set up in the garden with no problem. Alan Wilmot of Dunedin has built and operated this type of railway. He started 5 years ago with the construction of the village and then introduced the railway. The buildings are made out of boxwood. Regular maintenance preserves the condition of the timber from the elements. Purely a freelance layout which involves the whole family, but Alan keeps the track and rolling stock in good order by running the trains regularly in all seasons. Avondale, Auckland, and Bert Vener explains his LGB railway.
It was a bit of a conflict in my mind as to whether I wanted to be. I used to have an N-scale layout indoor, and I wanted to have a railway again, and it was a case of, will I want to have an indoor layout again, or basically go back to outside. I knew Lehman, the LGB, for a long time from Europe, and it used to look toy-like, and I really was surprised when I looked at it again, and I was quite pleased with it, so I decided to go outside. I never built an outside layout before, so I find it probably a bit more challenging to build it outside, simply because it has to be all weatherproof, so it doesn't wash away all the time. But I'm really pleased with the result so far.
Another enthusiast, Eric Anderson, is a clever building maker in G-scale.
Probably because there was a lack of this type of kit on the market, and it had to be scratch built from the start. And the more I got involved in doing it, the more I seemed to take note of the buildings that were around or disappearing off the scene over a period of time, and just sort of fell into more of a like of building these type of kit sets. You've got to start from a point of referring to something that you're going to build, you've got to have an idea of what it is you're actually building. If you're going to do a scale model and a replica model, and I think I like to build something that's fairly true to the realistic form in which it took. Getting something to look exactly lifelike in every way. In other words, if you took a photograph of the particular model and it's finished, it would be hard to tell which was the actual building itself and which was the model. That's what I aim to finish up with, is a purely realistic and looking structure in every way, if I possibly can achieve that.
Back to the smaller scale models, here's John Agnew's grand version and vision of the west coast of the South Island in 3/16 scale.
Been doing it for some years now. I was born on the west coast, born in Otago, and of course I've been living in Auckland for nigh on 30 years, so I guess I don't regard myself as being a coaster. But there's just something about the west coast, the scenery, the fact that it was so isolated from the rest of New Zealand, the fact that it's almost backwards. The structures on the west coast are much the same today as they were 100 years ago. There's just something about it, and as I said before, the fact that there were steam engines there in the 50s and 60s that you couldn't find elsewhere, and there was such a collection of steam engines. And what Jack and I are going to do, of course, is we're going to make sure that we have a representative of every class of engine, and probably most of the carriages too, that were to be seen on the coast in the 50s. So as I say, we've just got to think about it, the wild and woolly west coast. It's so green, there's mountain scenery, well, model all the shingle fans that you see up around the Aotearoa area. Just, you know, something different. It's quite a task. It took us 14 years to actually build the layout when we had it in the old Te Atatu situation. And then, of course, we moved house about 3 years ago, and it's now taken 3 years to get us to where we are now. We're now at the stage where most of the layout is running, but we've got a hell of a lot of scenery to recreate and to put back in again. But with Jack's assistance, we'll get there. We've got somebody coming in to start to paint our back scenes in about another month, so the railway will start to come alive again. But it's quite something.
Now for O-Gauge, Trev Bartlett describes some attributes of his railroad.
Trying to capture something real in miniature. Something artificially real, not something that's in real life, like a particular area or a particular time span, but just miniaturising life. This particular layout was started about 4 years ago. And then it was shifted from over 3 different houses. A particular part from there up for about 2 metres, this is its 3rd house. One of the biggest thrills I get is when I hand lay the track, like I lay down the ties, the rail, then it's all ballasted. And I actually drive an engine over that track for the first time. What started off as just rail and wood, and to actually run something over it, it's really quite a thrill. But that's just the initial stage, of course. There's always, of course, a chance it won't run over it, but that doesn't happen very often. I have done the electrics myself, and it's really kept to the minimum requirement. I don't like electrics. It needs it to run it, but I don't like it. I like scenery, painting, so it's a very, very simple wiring. It's purely a pastime, and for me I really only work in here in the winter, because it's an enclosed room. There's no daylight coming in, and when the sun comes out in Auckland, I like to be out there in it, not working in an enclosed room. So it's only a winter hobby really, and during the summer months I really only come in for when visitors arrive to show it. So it's an indoor hobby.
Dave Reick, well, Dave's been a modeller for many years, whose OO layout is based on all aspects of British railways.
Well, I set out to create a section of the Somerset and Dorset Railway that used to run from Bath in Wiltshire to Bournemouth on the south coast. And the idea is to create the atmosphere of the S&D. Fortunately, it's been very well photographed and chronicled, especially by Ivo Peters, so there's a wealth of information about it, which of course you don't always find with other prototypes. I always try to aim for the general effect. I'm not a rivet counter. If it looks right, then to me it is right, even if perhaps there may be the odd dimensional or detail error. Well, I adopted the American L-girder construction for the baseboard because I've seen on other layouts how excellent it is, how economical in material and how strong. And I've learnt from experience that unless you've got a good baseboard, you'll never have a good running railway. The baseboard is the foundation of everything, and it should be as carefully planned and executed as every other aspect of the railway.
Don Allen models 3/16 to the inch NZR and depicts the main trunk line and its outstanding feature, the Raurimu spiral.
Well, this is a replica of the North Island main trunk railway system, and the main trunk stations thereon were Taumanui, right in front of the cab here. This is an engine cab from KA 941, which was purchased at Pacific Steel when they were cutting the engine up. 941 was one of the main trunk engines and worked up the spiral, which I have built a model of, and it incorporates Raurimu Station and heading north up and through Frankton, Taumanui and Frankton, and other stations incorporated on this railway, Puki Tutu and Owango. And these are pretty well-known stations to the rail fans, and it's just to recreate in the 50s and 60s when all the steam engines were running around, KAs and the Js and ABs, and it just recreates for me the interest in railways in model form, and that's what gives me the interest. One tends to keep the scene going, not only in my mind, but in actual seeing it in model form, and having liked the railway, the main trunk railway, and that's why I get the enjoyment out of seeing it in model form. And we try, and hobby as a general principle tries to get things as authentic as possible, going over the history of the North Island main trunk railway, the engines and the carriages and wagons, goods wagons. It's all changed a lot now, it's all modernised, and it's good to be able to remember just how it was, because that was basically how New Zealand was developed through the railway system. And a lot of the magic names, like I mentioned on the main trunk, Taumanui, Raurimu, Spiral, and Frankton Junction, and all those places, they're quite, it's our heritage really to remember these places, and we have done that, and a lot of my friends in model form to remember and play trains, if you will. That's really what it's all about.
Another North Island main trunk line is that of Ray Vickers. Ray's not kept to any particular section or form of the trunk, and his station names are not those of actual stations as they existed in the 50s to 60s and in use on the trunk. Some are corruptions of names deliberately misspelt or borrowed from other places. Auckland Metropolitan Model Railway Club's layout is quite different from your average home layout, drawing on various talents of the membership. In planning their present railway, they incorporated lessons learned from previously built layouts. They wanted large radius curves, one large yard, industries at every way station, giving freight trains an excuse to do some switching, and electrical systems allowing each engineer to work his train anywhere on the line. They have directed their resources to modelling American railroads in HO scale and adopted the name Pacific Western Railway, allowing them to use available decals on unique paint schemes, providing a cohesive entity. The railway's been under construction since 1979 and they always find things to do like sceneries and structures to finish certain districts. One of their objectives is to operate it like a real railroad, timetable trains and routing freight cars from one destination to another, with all the challenges such systems involve. finally, we visit the Hamilton Model Railway Club and their very functional 3/16 scale NZR layout.